Judith, it's a pleasure. It's such a delight and an honor. And as I was saying, I'm just excited and bursting at the seams with all of the history and the mystery and everything here. So thanks for taking time. And maybe I'll just quickly introduce myself. I've been into Sun Ra since basically late 70s or so when I was in high school. And then in 83 is when I first heard them live and met them the same night. I was a freshman in college and I was already on the radio station there in New York at Columbia, WKCR. You might know the station. And I ended up in 87 producing this festival. You might have heard about this marathon that went a whole week, like 113 hours continuous of Sun Ra. So I didn't do it alone, but I basically organized that. And the group came up and hung out on Easter Sunday of that year. And then subsequently I went on and did a lot of different things in the music world, studio engineer and producer, I had a label. But the thing I've done the most and longest is radio. I moved over to Zurich, Switzerland, where I've been for more than a dozen years, and I've been doing this radio show here called Sun Radio. And one of my rituals is I always open with Sun Ra. And sometimes I play only Sun Ra certain times a year, like around arrival day time and like that. So just to let you know me a bit, and I'm really blessed and honored to also to have been literally like sitting at Sunny's feet quite a lot and just listening a lot and having some conversation, but a lot more listening, and then knowing the guys in the band for a long time as well. Congrats on the move to Mexico, by the way. How did that go? And you all more or less settled at this point, or?
I lived here before for 2 years, and my husband worked the ferries in San Francisco. And so I think 2015, he took me back there. I just came back here. He passed away last November.
Oh, so sorry.
And yeah, it's quite an adjustment and dealing with it there and then coming back here. But it all works out for the good. This house is so beautiful. He's all over it. That's the reason, the color and everything. He was born right outside of Guadalajara, Tlaquepaque. So I had friends drive my stuff up, and me and my dog, and that was a great thing. It saved a lot of problems.
Up,
and it made
up from where, or down, you mean, or?
I was in the Bay Area. I was born in Berkeley, California, lived in Berkeley, California all my life. I met Sun Ra while in Berkeley, going to San Francisco State College. And so I was in Richmond when I came up here, but still East Bay.
Okay. Okay, but when you say up, you mean perfectly down.
I'm in Mazatlan. So Mazatlan is down the coast. You go through Arizona, it's across from Baja. Sure. We don't get the storms that they get, but it's beautiful here. The people it's great, especially being a person of African-American descent. I forget. I'm just a human. And that's like, what a relief.
I'm just amazed that no one ever interviewed you. This is, it's incredible to me. But so here we go. So tell me a little more maybe about your background, upbringing, family. You started to mention from the Bay Area. Say a little more about that.
My dog is my nephew. Hey!
Go ahead. Do you need to,
She's a gecko hunter.
Oh.
Which she never saw them before. Here, let me get her.
That's okay.
And,
no worries.
Her name is Nefertiti, by the way.
Wow.
I had asked for a sign for the perfect dog for me. And since I went to Egypt with Sun Ra on his first tour, when they told me that her name was Nefertiti, I took that as a sign. Amazing. But anyway, I was born at Oakland Children's Hospital. I was raised in Berkeley, California. My neighbors were Japanese, Hispanic. We all lived in the same little government complex. And so I always wanted a house outside of the US because I grew up with Japanese people who told me how the US took all their homes from them. And I was like, they can do anything. And this is at a young age, it hit me. But it was something I always wanted. So when my husband said, you want to build a house in Mazatlan? I was like, yeah, let's do it. So that's how we did this. I went to San Francisco State College. I studied dance and theater and got degrees in theater, English, and psychology, drama therapy. But some of my girlfriends were at San Francisco State studying college, and one of the boyfriends, his name was DeLeon, knew Sun Ra. He was from the East Coast. He was from New York. So Sun Ra was coming to San Francisco State and or the Greek Theater We did both of them. And it was amazing because we were like, oh, great. He gave us some of the music. We did all this choreography. We spent hours. We got some costumes. And then when we hit, it was like the choreography went out the window, which we had no idea because, and my background is I had not that much exposure. The only place I had been when I met the orchestra was I had driven from Berkeley, California to Utah, to Logan, Utah. That was it. And I didn't have much communication with people from state that were out of the area or out of the country. But anyhow, so when we danced with Sun Ra, all the choreography went out the window and we just hit it because there was no other way to do it. You could not do something structured. And then we did the Greek theater, which was outside at UC Berkeley, and Sun Ra liked my dancing. I was flying through the air. I remember it vividly. And they were there for a while, and I had a 52 Chevy, stick shift, and I drove the guys around. My girlfriend, whose boyfriend got us introduced to the orchestra, lived across the street from where Ken Moshe was the one. No, it was Dillian. He lived across the street from, the girlfriend lived across the street from where the band was staying. So I met some of the fellas. I'd drive them all over San Francisco because I knew it like the back of my hand. And Pat Patrick, I drove him around once and he said, oh man, you got a lot of heart driving this car.
So let me just jump in and just to try to place the time a little bit. Now I understand, so Sun Ra was teaching out of Berkeley at one point. Was this before or at that time?
This was before. This was before he taught. So I was at State from around 63. I think I got my degree in 68. So somewhere around 66, 67, he came out before he did that. I think it was a 6-month residency. That's when I first met them. They did a couple of gigs in Sacramento when I drove them. Sun Ra liked the fact that I was driving this car, and I had my own apartment at that time when they finally came up and did the residency. So it was a life-changing event for me. Plus the mentality of the East Coast. And I met June, and June and I were such good friends. I was devastated when she passed, but we had gone to Costa Rica together on a vacation, just she and I, and just before she passed, so that was a blessing.
Wow, sorry, I'm muting just when I'm typing because I'm trying to capture some of this too because this is amazing. Okay, just to mention, now I don't know if you've seen this book that is called The Earthly Recordings of Sun Ra. There was a second edition that was quite a lot bigger than the first one. Anyway, and it catalogs the known recordings, including tapes and stuff. And it's obviously far from complete, but it's the most complete all-in-one place record that I have as a reference. And you're first showing up in there in Europe at the end of 71. So it's interesting that, I guess, based on the known recordings, that you're not showing up earlier, but that's quite a few years before it's shown in the record. So it's pretty cool to find out.
We weren't singing before, it was simply dance.
Yeah. And
no, we weren't singing before. So it was just dance. And I remember that first trip was after the residency. Okay. Because he was there for 6 months. Then he went from the residency to New York and did a couple of gigs. And then from there, I did my first tour with him to Europe, which I think that we started off in, it was Finland or.
It looks like Sweden, but we'll get to that.
It was in that area.
Let's go back just a little bit. If you could mention again, you focused in your studies on, it was theater and psychology and some other, I don't know. I want to hear about that.
I have a BA with an emphasis in theater and a minor in English and a master's degree in psychology with the emphasis in drama therapy.
Okay. And you were already getting into that at the time when you connected with the group? You were still?
When I first met the group, I was studying. When I toured with them, I had my BA. When I left and came back is when I got my master's.
Okay.
And I had an African-American children's theater group when I came back called the Best Children's Theater, which was I wrote the plays and directed them. And one of them was called The Day Black Folks Left Planet Earth. My influence was Sun Ra. I did another one called The Sound of Silence, where Black people where all of a sudden the Black music and all the contributions were gone, and the people, the inhabitants of the earth, went nuts. I just ran into some, I have photographs of them. At some point I'm gonna post them, and I'm still in touch with one of my main actors who's now in his 50s. But what I learned from Sun Ra, the discipline. I love discipline. I studied ballet for many years because but you can't do anything without discipline. The whole earth is based on discipline, and they want to be free, right? But the sun goes up and comes down. It's all discipline. You can't be a musician without having the discipline of having the language, even if it's a gift. And the same thing with dance. But that came from my influence from Japanese people, but also from Sun Ra, because it was always discipline. He was always talking about discipline. And the other dancer and I do want to tell that story when you feel it's appropriate, of how if you were in the orchestra and you weren't in place, he called it in place. He said we had to be ready like birds. Whenever the leader of the birds took off to fly, you had to be there. So it was to sharpen our intuition so that we would be one in terms of our thinking, and not just our thinking, our feeling, our spiritual connection with the band. Now, what was the point of that story? Oh, the discipline and so the word was you get fired upon if you were out of place. If your mind was out of place, if your dancing was out of place. And when we first did that tour, my memory serves me correctly, he took 3 male dancers from the East Bay, Kenny, Kevin, and Doug, and Cheryl Banks and myself. And at some point, he let Cheryl and I know we could not be dancing like women. We'd studied jazz, we'd studied African, I'd studied ballet, Martha Graham, but whatever we were doing the woman thing. And he was like, you can't do that. So it took us a minute to understand what he meant. So we were kind of running around, even in our dress style, taking down from what was feminine to more like, I was a tomboy growing up. So it was like getting rid of the frills. And the other reason for that was we had to carry our own load in the band. Being women in the States, the man carried their baggage and all that. We had a lot of baggage. The orchestra had a lot of baggage. So we all had to pull up our fair share. But ultimately, what not being a woman dancing meant was we had to learn to listen to the music. And I danced with them when they came out, I think it was 2019, to San Francisco, which just brought everything home for me, that whole experience. So it taught us, I can't speak to others, it taught me to listen to the music and get inside the music. He taught us to listen to the rhythms. He had Cheryl and I one time up in his room teaching us how to dance to 5/4. So now when I hear that, I know what it is. And also dancing inside of the music. He also taught us this was a traumatic, but I want to say this first. When I first danced with him and the other dancers had fallen to the side, he went to Sacramento when he did a gig in Sacramento, California. And I was standing backstage with my costume. It was like very full. And I was like, I'm not gonna dance unless my feet move me out there. And I remember my feet started patting, started getting the rhythm. And when they said, go, we went. And so it was feel for the music. And he liked that about me. He also could read us in terms of what we had an affinity for. So I found out mine was blues. And I'd be backstage and I'd be looking over it with the rhythm and everything, and he'd give me the eye and then I'd go out. But I also found there was something about the blues that was inside of me that he was able to pull out. But the story I wanted to tell you about getting fired upon, we got the Sun Ra fired. Cheryl and I went out on John Gilmore's solo. At this point, we didn't know we weren't supposed to do that. And he read us the Riot Act. And because we were so young and impressionable, we were both naive, we weren't worldly. And that's another thing, he protected us. He knew we came from families that cared about us. We went around the world, but when he first went to Europe, it was a 20-piece something orchestra, 4 women. We ended up in Egypt, but he made it a point to protect us and make sure we were taken care of. But anyhow, after being fired upon, we sat back. And then he would, We pay more attention to what was going on. It's, no, you don't go out on somebody's solo. We're a part of the orchestra. So there's a time to take a solo, there's a time to rest, there's a time to be part of the harmony. And there's, I can't even explain, it's like being inside the vortex of the music. When I danced with them in 2019 and Marshall was conducting, he played this piece and it was like being inside the eye of the hurricane. Can't even explain it, such a wonderful experience. And then after my husband died in 2021, Sue Pearlstein is a good friend of mine. And so we took a girls' trip and we went up to Oregon to hear the orchestra for 3 days. And that music lifted me out of a pit of despair. I had lost, I was a sudden, I didn't know he was gonna die, but it lifted me, just the music. And they were like, aren't you gonna dance? Because I always bring costumes. Oh, no, I'm not dancing. I just came up to listen. But the third night, Noel was like, hey, don't you want to dance? And I said, we'll sit in the front. And then they hit Space is the Place, and my feet did what they do. And I got up and I hit a few licks. So that was special. But the music is just, it's a healing, it's an awakening. If people take the time to listen, it's inside. And what I also, some of the dancers that have come after, because Cheryl and I were really trained by Sun Ra. He put us in the living room when he's rehearsing, and he rehearsed all the time. We lived at the Sun Ra house for I don't know how long it was, but a period of time. So we were there with the musicians, and we learned that we were a part of the music. And I've seen some of the dancers that want to be on stage all the time. It's not about you or me. It's not about our ego. It's not about how great we dance. It's about being a part of the music. And in order to do that, you have to listen. And you're listening with your whole being, with your